Earth was a small pale blue dot in the vastness of space, a forgotten world. On the fringes of the galaxy, its people had long been content to explore their own corner of the universe and stay out of the affairs of the greater galactic powers. But the time of silence was ending, and no one knew it yet. A new force had arrived, the Drakari, an ancient race with technology far beyond anything humanity had ever seen. When their ships first appeared in the skies above Earth, the human governments thought it was just another diplomatic visit, an exchange of knowledge, or a peaceful negotiation. But the truth was far darker. The Drakari didn't come to converse. They came to conquer. Without warning, they began to strip Earth's colonies of their resources, sending fleets to the outer edges of human space to mine asteroids and take whatever they pleased. Human leaders scrambled to make contact, hoping to resolve the situation diplomatically. But the Drakari weren't interested in talks or negotiations. They had no use for diplomacy and saw humans as nothing more than an insignificant species standing in the way of their plans. The first attack came without provocation, a military strike on a mining colony in the outer belt. Earth's colonies were undefended and unprepared for the sheer force of the Drakari assault. The population was crushed in an instant. The destruction of entire cities was broadcast to Earth as a stark reminder that they were at the mercy of these invaders, and no one came to help. The Galactic Council, a distant governing body composed of many species, watched, but did nothing. Humanity was too weak, too new to matter to them. Earth had no allies among the stars, no ancient power to vouch for them. The resistance was born out of desperation. Small cells of civilian soldiers and scientists who had long feared that Earth's place in the galaxy was too vulnerable. They fought back with what they had, turning old weapons and technology into new tools of defiance. Their first victory was small but significant. They hijacked a Drakari ship, a cargo vessel filled with stolen supplies, and took it down over one of Earth's moons. It was a costly battle, and many lives were lost. But the message was clear: humans could fight back, they could adapt, they could survive. And the resistance began to grow across the colonies. People took to the streets in protest against the Drakari occupation. Those who had once hidden in fear began to speak up. They rallied to a single voice, the voice of a world that refused to be broken. Earth had always been seen as a minor player on the galactic stage, too young, too fragile. But now the perception was about to change. In the dark corners of space, where humanity had once been ignored, whispers spread about the humans rising up, and the thought began to take root in the minds of the oppressed of other species who had long suffered under the rule of the Drakari and other powers. Earth's defiance became a beacon of hope for those who had none. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for far too long, and now they would know that when Earth spoke, it would be loud and clear. The resistance had begun to gain ground, but the cost was steep. Lives lost in every skirmish, every city retaken from the Drakari, marked with destruction and sorrow. The Drakari were relentless. They knew no mercy, and their forces continued to grow stronger each day. Humanity's small victories were celebrated, but they were fleeting like sparks in the dark against the overwhelming tide of alien power. Earth's leaders met in secret. They could no longer pretend diplomacy would work. They had tried to reason with the invaders, but the Drakari cared nothing for human life or the fragile peace they had tried to preserve. The situation had escalated beyond control. Earth had no choice but to prepare for war. The decision was made to launch a full-scale retaliation, a strike against the Drakari fleet that had occupied their colonies. It was a gamble, one that would cost the lives of countless soldiers, civilians alike. But there was no other way to stop them. The human scientists worked tirelessly to adapt their stolen technology, reverse engineering Drakari weapons using every scrap of alien tech they could find and blending it with humanity's own ingenuity. The result was a series of new weapon ships designed to outsmart the Drakari's superior technology. Humans were resourceful in ways no one had expected, and that resourcefulness became their greatest strength. The first of these new ships was launched from Earth's military base, a hybrid of human engineering and Drakari design. It was faster, more maneuverable than the Drakari ships, and equipped with new energy weapons that could pierce their shields. The first encounter with the Drakari fleet was nothing short of a surprise for the invaders. They had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to learn, to fight on their terms. The battle was chaotic human ships, darting in and out of the Drakari fleet using their new technology to disable enemy ships and send them into retreat. It wasn't a decisive victory, but it was a clear statement to the galaxy that Earth was not going to bow down to their invaders. Not without a fight, the Drakari responded with fury. Their counterattack was swift and brutal, targeting the colonies with devastating force. Entire cities were wiped out in an instant. Entire populations were obliterated. But even in the face of such destruction, humanity refused to back down. They would rebuild, they would fight, and they would not let the Drakari have their way. The human response was immediate, and without hesitation. The Drakari had underestimated Earth before, but now they would learn the hard way that humanity's spirit was unbreakable. The resistance grew in numbers as more planets joined the fight. As humanity's message spread across the stars, the oppressed began to take notice. Species who had long lived under the thumb of the Drakari found new courage and began to rise against their oppressors. The Drakari were losing control not just over Earth, but across their empire. Once a monolithic power, they now faced a growing rebellion on every front. Humanity's defiance had sparked something bigger than they had ever imagined, something that would change the galaxy forever. The tide was turning, and the Drakari knew it was only a matter of time before they were no longer the ones in control. Earth's message was out there, now echoing through the stars. It wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. It was a rallying cry for anyone who had ever been oppressed, ignored, or underestimated. The Drakari had made a grave mistake in thinking that humanity would bend to their will. As the resistance grew stronger, Earth's broadcast stations found ways to hijack Drakari communications to spread their defiance to every corner of the galaxy. The human message was simple: we will not fall. And soon more and more eyes turned toward Earth, some in shock, some in curiosity, but others with a growing sense of hope. The galaxy's powers had long turned a blind eye to the suffering of lesser species, but now those species were listening as the resistance reached out with the message that was shared by every single person across Earth: we are humanity, and we will fight for our future. The first signs of change began as smaller alien factions, once neutral, began to offer quiet support to the rebellion, giving intel on Drakari movements, supplying weapons, or even offering safe havens for escaped refugees. Those on the margins of galactic society saw something in humanity that they had never seen before, a spark of hope. The Drakari were relentless, but they were not infallible. Their arrogance had been their undoing. They underestimated Earth's ability to rise against them, and the human resistance was using that very weakness against them. Human strategy became a game of misdirection and cunning. They struck when and where the Drakari least expected it, hitting supply lines, communication hubs, and weapon caches where the enemy was weakest. The Drakari, who once looked down on humanity, now found themselves fighting a war on multiple fronts, and their grip on the galaxy's underbelly began to slip. One planet after another began to rebel. At first, it was small skirmishes, isolated uprisings against Drakari troops, but with each victory the resistance gained more strength, more supporters, and more knowledge of their enemies' weaknesses. As the war spread across the galaxy, Earth's rebellion started to feel less like a singular human effort and more like the spark that ignited a much larger fire. Whole star systems began to rally behind humanity, sending fighters to bolster Earth's fleet and sending messages of solidarity to their struggling colonies. The resistance on Earth had a new sense of purpose. They were no longer just fighting for their own survival. They were fighting for an entire galaxy of oppressed beings, and every victory for Earth's cause became a victory for the oppressed people of every world. But the Drakari were not so easily shaken. They had underestimated humanity's potential, but they weren't about to make that mistake again. They unleashed their most devastating weapon, yet the Genesis Protocol, the weapon that could alter the very atmosphere of a planet, turning it into a barren wasteland. With the press of a button, Earth's leadership was thrown into panic. The news that the Drakari were ready to deploy such a weapon was enough to shake the resolve of even the most steadfast resistance fighters. Humanity's future hung in the balance. The Genesis Protocol was capable of wiping out entire worlds with ease, but the resistance knew that if the Drakari launched it against Earth, there would be no coming back. They would not let it happen. But this time the fight wasn't just for Earth's survival. It was for the entire galaxy. The stakes had never been higher, and humanity was about to take its greatest risk. Yet they had no choice but to act now or lose everything. The news of the Genesis Protocol spread like wildfire across Earth, and its colonies, the very weapon that had once seemed like a distant nightmare, was now a present threat looming over the heads of every human being. The resistance had to move quickly. There was no time to waste. Every second was crucial. The fate of their world and their future depended on stopping the Dracari from unleashing such devastation. Humanity had faced unimaginable odds before, but this was different. They were now racing against time, with the weight of the galaxy's hopes resting on their shoulders. Every scientist, every engineer, every soldier worked together to find a way to stop the protocol from firing. If they failed, Earth would become another dead world. The plan was bold, risky, and dangerous, but it was their only shot. The human engineers who had spent months studying Dracari technology worked tirelessly to find a weakness in the Genesis protocol. They knew the device was highly complex. Its activation could only be stopped by disabling its core systems. Deep within the Dracari's central command ship, a heavily guarded fortress orbiting one of their most heavily defended planets. This would require a small team to infiltrate the ship, sabotage the protocol, and escape before the Dracari could retaliate. The stakes were higher than ever before. It wasn't just Earth on the line anymore. It was the entire galaxy. The team selected for this mission was made up of Earth's finest soldiers and their most brilliant engineers. They were an unlikely group from different backgrounds, but united in one cause: to save their home and every world threatened by the Dracari. The plan was set into motion as the human fleet gathered outside Dracari space, preparing for a diversion to draw their enemies' attention away from the real target, the command ship itself. The mission would be launched under the cover of darkness, their movements unseen as they snuck through enemy lines and boarded the Dracari vessel. The team knew they were walking into the heart of enemy territory. The risk of failure was high, but their resolve was stronger than ever. They moved swiftly through the shadows, their hearts pounding in their chests as they made their way toward the heart of the enemy ship. Each step could be their last, but they kept pushing forward with the knowledge that humanity's future was in their hands. Meanwhile, on Earth, the resistance had begun to mount a full-scale counteroffensive. The human fleet launched a series of decoy attacks designed to mislead the Dracari into thinking the main assault was coming from the far side of their empire. This bought the infiltration team precious time as they worked their way deeper into the heart of the Dracari vessel. The tension was unbearable. With every moment that passed, the weight of the mission grew heavier and heavier. Each soldier knew they might never make it back, but they also knew that their success would change everything. It wasn't just about stopping the Genesis protocol. It was about sending a message to the Dracari and to the galaxy that humanity would not be cowed. Humanity would not be crushed under the weight of tyranny. This was their fight, and they were going to win no matter the cost. When the team finally reached the heart of the ship, they found the Genesis protocol secured in a heavily guarded chamber. It was an imposing structure surrounded by layers of defenses, but the humans had studied its design. They knew how to disable the weapon. The countdown to activation was ticking down, and every second felt like an eternity. One by one, they disabled the security systems until they were standing at the heart of the protocol itself. The decision was made in an instant. One of the engineers moved to input the final sequence that would shut down the weapon forever. Just as the Dracari realized what was happening, the team engaged in a fierce firefight. As they fought to complete their mission, they were outnumbered, outgunned, but they had something more: the determination to see it through. Humanity's fate hung in the balance, and they weren't going to let it slip away. The battle inside the heart of the Dracari command ship raged as the infiltration team fought tooth and nail to complete their mission. With every second that passed, the tension grew thicker. The countdown for the Genesis protocol continued its steady advance to oblivion. The team had fought their way through layers of defenses, and now they were facing the final hurdle: disabling the weapon itself. The engineer at the control panel worked furiously, inputting the shutdown sequence, but the Dracari forces were closing in. A group of soldiers was already outside the chamber doors, and the team knew their time was running out. Every blow they landed against their foes was a step closer to death, but they pressed on because if they didn't, humanity would fall. The air was thick with the sound of blaster fire and shouts of defiance, But even as they fought back, the human team was aware of the world hanging in the balance. The very life of their home Earth rested on their success. The engineers' fingers moved faster, their minds focused completely on the task ahead, each keystroke bringing them closer to shutting down the weapon. When finally the doors to the chamber burst open, a wave of Dracari soldiers poured in, weapons raised and ready. But the team was prepared. They didn't hesitate. They fought with the ferocity of those who had nothing left to lose, because they didn't have the luxury of fear. They were fighting for everyone they loved, every home, every person they'd ever known. As the firefight intensified, the engineer shouted the final command. In desperation, the weapon's core systems flickered, then began to shut down. A few seconds of quiet followed, then a soft whirring noise. The countdown on the screen stopped, and the room fell into stunned silence. The Genesis protocol had been disabled, but the victory was short-lived. The Dracari forces hadn't been neutralized completely, and they now began to realize the extent of the damage the humans had caused. The blast doors to the chamber were sealed shut, but the fighting was far from over. Outside, the Resistance fleet had drawn Dracari attention away from their command ship. But now that the weapon had been deactivated, the Dracari turned their focus back to Earth. They retaliated with devastating force, hitting the human fleet with an overwhelming assault. But the Resistance wasn't done yet. They fought back tooth and nail. Every human ship that still had a fighter left launched its remaining weapons in a final act of defiance. They had lost so much, but they had something the Dracari could never take away: their spirit. The battle raged in space as Earth's forces held their ground with desperation and determination. They weren't fighting just to survive now. They were fighting to end the Dracari's reign of terror once and for all. Back on the ground, the Resistance in the cities rose up against the Dracari oppressors. Civilians took to the streets, joining in the war against their invaders. Every hand that had once been helpless now became a weapon against tyranny, and across the galaxy the oppressed rose in tandem. Every world, once crushed by the Dracari, found new hope. The spark had ignited into a wildfire, and the Dracari realized too late they were losing control. Earth was no longer a forgotten world in the galaxy. It was a beacon of resistance, a symbol of hope to every being that had ever been silenced. The war was far from over, but humanity had proven something the Dracari had never expected. Humanity would not bend, humanity would not break. The tide was turning in humanity's favor, and the Dracari would soon find themselves on the wrong side of history. The relief was short-lived, and the cost of victory became painfully clear. The Genesis protocol had been disabled, but the Dracari weren't finished yet. They were wounded, yes, but far from broken. With their most devastating weapon deactivated, the invaders shifted tactics, launching a brutal counteroffensive against the human colonies and Earth itself. Cities that had been liberated were swiftly retaken by the Dracari, and countless lives were lost in the ensuing chaos. The victory over the Genesis protocol had come at a price. Earth was reeling, its population grieving for the fallen. But even in the darkest of moments, there was no surrender. Humanity had tasted the sweetness of defiance, and it was not about to let it slip away. The Dracari had underestimated humanity's will to survive, but it was now clear that Earth would not just survive. It would fight back with everything it had. The human leadership convened once more, their resolve hardened by the losses they'd endured. There would be no negotiations this time, no more plea for mercy from their invaders. The battle for Earth was not just a fight for survival, it was a fight to carve humanity's place in the galaxy. A place where no one would ever again assume that humans were insignificant. Earth's military and scientific communities worked day and night, pooling their remaining resources to turn the tide. The tech stolen from the Dracari had given humanity a crucial edge. But the war had taken its toll. Supplies were dwindling, weapons were running low, and morale was fragile. The human spirit, though, remained unyielding. And as the Resistance regrouped, they found new sources of strength, drawing on the support of alien species who had long lived under the Dracari's thumb. It wasn't just the humans who were fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for an entire galaxy of oppressed peoples. Each victory for humanity was a victory for the downtrodden races who had suffered for far too long. Word spread of Earth's resilience, of the human resistance that had managed to hold its ground, and more planets began to send aid, offering ships, soldiers, and vital resources. The coalition of oppressed species continued to grow, and with every new ally, humanity's forces grew stronger. But as Earth's forces prepared for a final stand, they knew the stakes had never been higher. The Drakari would not allow their empire to crumble without a fight, and they still had the upper hand in many areas of the galaxy. They had the numbers, the technology, and the will to see humanity crushed once and for all. The final confrontation would take place in deep space, a battle that would determine the fate of Earth and the galaxy. The Resistance's plan was to strike at the heart of the Drakari Empire itself, to bring the fight to their homeworld. The risk was enormous. If they failed, Earth would be lost, and the galaxy's hope for a new order would be extinguished. But if they succeeded, the Drakari would fall, and the universe would finally have a chance to rebuild. As the human fleet gathered for the assault, Earth's leaders made their final preparations. The people of Earth stood united, knowing that victory would require the greatest sacrifice. Families said their goodbyes, soldiers braced for what would likely be their last fight, and civilians, some of whom had never once picked up a weapon, prepared to support the effort in whatever way they could. The time for hesitation was over. Humanity had fought too hard, lost too much, to back down now. They were on the precipice of an all-out war to save their world, their future, and their place in the stars. The Drakari had underestimated them once before. It would not happen again. The moment had arrived. The human fleet, now reinforced by alien allies, stood at the edge of Drakari space, poised for what could be their final assault. Earth's leadership had no illusions. They knew the odds were stacked against them. The Drakari, in their arrogance, had underestimated humanity's potential for far too long. But this would be different. They had no more tricks to pull, no more reserves to call upon. This was a do-or-die mission, and humanity was not backing down. The plan was simple in concept but staggering in scope. The coalition of species would launch a two-pronged attack. One fleet would engage the Drakari in a direct confrontation, drawing their attention away from the human flagship. Meanwhile, a smaller elite team would infiltrate the heart of the Drakari Empire, on the surface of their homeworld itself. There, they would target the Drakari leadership, those who had orchestrated the oppression of countless species, including Earth. But humanity wasn't fighting for revenge alone. They were fighting for justice, for freedom, and for every world that had been silenced beneath the Drakari's boot. The stakes couldn't be higher. As the human and allied fleets advanced toward Drakari space, the sounds of battle echoed throughout the comms. Every ship in the fleet was on high alert, ready for the brutal conflict that would soon unfold. The air was thick with the weight of the moment. Some of the older soldiers had been through many wars, but this was different. This was the fight for the future of humanity, a future they could no longer afford to lose. The battle in space erupted in a flash of light as the Drakari fleet met the combined might of the Resistance. The Drakari were powerful, their ships massive and heavily armored, but the humans and their allies had one thing the Drakari lacked: a fire that burned brighter than any weapon, a belief that they would not be wiped out from the stars. Earth's forces fought with fury and precision, using every tactic they had learned through years of struggle, exploiting weaknesses in Drakari formations and taking advantage of every opening. But the real challenge was still ahead: the infiltration team. They had been trained for this moment, but nothing could truly prepare them for the enormity of the task. They would need to land on the Drakari homeworld, find the central command, and eliminate the highest-ranking officials in the Drakari military. The team knew the risks. They had trained for months, studying every piece of intel they could find, learning the ins and outs of Drakari technology, politics, and security. But even the best-laid plans had their flaws. They made their way through hostile territory, slipping past Drakari patrols and security checkpoints. The planet was a massive fortress, its skies filled with defensive weaponry and drones. But the humans were relentless. Every inch of ground they gained was a victory not just for Earth, but for all those who had suffered under the Drakari yoke. Meanwhile, the battle in space continued to rage, with the human fleet holding its ground against the relentless Drakari onslaught. The conflict was brutal. Human ships were destroyed, and lives were lost, but the resistance was unyielding. They fought not just for their survival, but for something far greater. They fought for the future of the galaxy. On the ground, the infiltration team reached their target, the Drakari Leadership Complex. It was a towering structure, surrounded by layers of security and guarded by elite forces. But humanity had learned from its mistakes. They had the element of surprise, and that was all they needed. With one final push, they breached the complex, engaging in fierce combat as they made their way to the central command room. The leader of the infiltration team stood before the control panel, knowing that one mistake would cost them everything. The countdown to the Drakari's final weapon had already begun. They had to act fast. As the team leader prepared to disable the weapon, he thought of Earth, of his family, his friends, and the countless lives that depended on their success. He pressed the button, and the weapon shut down. But the team knew that the war was far from over. The Drakari would not go quietly. It was only a matter of time before they would have to face the full might of the Drakari retaliation. But for now, humanity had struck a decisive blow. The Drakari's retaliation came swiftly and with devastating force. The war was far from over, and humanity knew that their victory would not be secured without further sacrifice. The homeworlds of Earth's allies were now targets, the Drakari desperate to maintain control over the galaxy they had spent millennia conquering. The battle raged on in space, and the cost of every victory felt heavier than the last. Yet despite the odds, humanity stood firm, unified by their defiance and their refusal to be crushed under the weight of their oppressors. The battle on Drakari homeworld was a turning point, but the real war was still being fought on every front, in every corner of the galaxy. Earth had given the galaxy hope, but now it was time to finish what they had started. Humanity's allies were now taking up arms alongside them, bolstered by the strength of the human spirit. The Drakari Empire, once a seemingly unstoppable force, was showing cracks, weaknesses that would only continue to grow as the resistance spread further. It was a matter of time before the Drakari would collapse under their own hubris, their overconfidence in their superiority. The final battle was set to take place at the heart of the Drakari Empire. A massive clash would determine the fate of the galaxy, whether it would remain enslaved by the Drakari or break free from their tyranny once and for all. The resistance, now composed of humans, and their newfound allies, prepared for the ultimate confrontation. It would be all-out war, but this time, the Drakari had no tricks left to play. The human fleet, strengthened by the support of countless species who had risen up alongside them, launched its final offensive. The Drakari knew that this would be their last chance to extinguish the flame of rebellion. But Earth's fleet was unlike anything they had faced before. The humans had learned, adapted, and overcome every challenge the Drakari had thrown at them. They had become warriors, not just for their own survival, but for the future of the galaxy. In the heart of the battle, Earth's flagship, the Victory's Dawn, led the charge. Its engines blazed as it cut through the Drakari fleet, sending shockwaves through the ranks of the enemy. Every human soldier, every officer, fought with the knowledge that this was their last chance, not just for Earth, but for every oppressed species in the galaxy. They pushed forward relentlessly, determined to secure victory no matter the cost. On the ground, the final assault on the Drakari capital was launched. The infiltration team that had disabled the Genesis Protocol now joined forces with Allied ground forces, sweeping through the Drakari strongholds, bringing the battle to their doorstep. The fight was fierce, with every inch of ground gained paid for with blood, but the resistance would not falter. They had seen the darkest days and had emerged stronger for it. As the Drakari leadership was overthrown, the heart of their empire crumbled. The oppressive system that had long dominated the galaxy was no more. In the wake of their defeat, the Drakari were left broken, scattered, and leaderless. Their once great empire fell into chaos as the people they had long subjugated rose up to reclaim their freedom. For humanity, the victory was hard-earned, but it was sweet. Earth had stood at the edge of annihilation, but it had prevailed. The sacrifices made along the way would never be forgotten. The lives lost, the families torn apart. They had all contributed to this moment. Earth had shown the galaxy what it meant to fight for freedom, to never surrender, no matter the odds. In the aftermath of the war, Earth was no longer the forgotten planet on the edge of the galaxy. It was a symbol of hope, a beacon to every species that had ever been oppressed. The galaxy had been changed forever, and humanity had secured its place among the stars. The journey had been long, the cost high, but Earth's voice had been loud and clear. It was a voice that would never be silenced again.